Okay, so uh, I believe you can see this blank screen now. Can you?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay. So we started with sorry, started with particles, then rigid bodies, and then we are talking about continuum. And when we are talking about continuum, see, in reality, the objects are neither particles nor rigid bodies, nor not even continuum. We know that objects are made of atoms. Atoms are also made of more fundamental particles, and when we go deeper inside a material, the atoms form a matrix. Okay, uh, or they form crystals, and those crystals, if there are multiple of them, then they have grain boundaries. Okay, so all those things are there. But when we talk about continuum, the object doesn't have those discrete particles. Okay, so if I'm trying to model an object over here, okay, let's so in that, if I were to draw a line along any direction, and let's say s is the coordinate along that direction, and if I had to plot any property, let's say the density of it, okay, if I were to plot the density of that material along that line, that would be a continuous line. Okay, it may not be a constant, it may not be uniform. Sorry, it may not be a constant. That means it may not be uniform everywhere, but it will still be a continuous variation. Okay. Um, but if you really think about it, if the object, if you think that it were made of discrete particles, okay, let's say atoms, there is one another improved level of approximation. If you start with that, so what will happen, this curve would not actually look like this. In between there would be gaps. Okay, so you can say it would look something like this. Okay, but then continuum is again another model. Okay, all of this that we are doing so far, and even after this, whatever you do, okay, whatever we do, okay, with the atomic model and anything, so all of these are basically models. What we are trying to do is conceptualize the real life objects so that we can put them into mathematical equations. So our discussion would be around this region, the continuum, okay, where the objects can deform. And and when we talk about courses such as solid mechanics, or strength of materials, okay, so they also dwell in on this part of the material model, which is the continuum. Okay, so so we'll be discussing over here. Okay, but before going any further, I would like to know if any of you have taken this course as an undergrad curriculum, or if you are familiar with the subject anyway.
স্যার পাপা বিশ্বাস আমার প্যানাডেলের মেথড ছিল আন্ডারগ্রাজুয়েটে।
Undergraduate chilo. Okay, okay,
Sir, myself, Rishabh Samanto, and I also have the subject finite element method in my undergraduate.
okay, okay, okay.
Hello, sir. I'm Siddhartha Banerjee. I
Mhm.
also have the subject of FEM in undergraduate.
Okay, okay, okay. So yeah, so few of you have taken this course. Okay, I would like to know from each of you. Let's start with Rishabh. What have you studied in finite element method?
Sir, in finite element method, like it is not. We have studied that it is not an exact analysis of any physical
Mhm.
problem.
Okay.
It basically deals with numerical problems. So
Mhm.
we we divide the problem with some finite elements, and then we
Mhm.
do the
Yes, great.
mathematical operations upon them.
Yes, great. Okay, I'll come to Papai last, but before that, I want to hear from Siddhartha. What you have learned in that
Uh,
course?
yes, sir. Basically, the FEM is a method which is actually we actually numerically integrate the differential equations uh,
Mm-hmm.
in the physical, the beam problems and heat transfer problems, spring problems.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And firstly, we divide the main our system and object into some a mesh. First, we generate the mesh, and we and after that we impose some elemental
Mm-hmm.
equations on that systems, and after that we bring those elemental equations into an assembly, into a big
Mm-hmm.
matrix, and then
Okay.
we apply the boundary conditions of the systems after depending upon the situation in which the
Mm-hmm.
system is working on. And after that we actually get the solution, and after that we process the whole process. So it is
Mm-hmm.
actually very familiar for the complex geometry and shapes to work on. That's all,
Okay.
I think.
Okay, okay, okay. Yes, it is very efficient. The term should be, it is more efficient with complicated geometry and non-linear problems. Yes. Papai, you probably have studied, you probably have studied in our department, right? In
Yes,
undergrad.
sir. Yes, sir.
So which course did you take? Finite element 1 or finite element 2?
2, sir.
You took finite element 2. Okay.
অনটা
Okay.
ছিল
So,
না।
finite element?
অন ছিল না, সেকেন্ডটা নিয়েছিলাম।
ওকে ওকে সো তুমি তার মধ্যে কি শিখেছিলে, মানে তুমি কি কোন কোন টপিক শিখেছিলে?
স্যার টপিক মনে নেই আমার, যেটা মনে আছে ফাইনালি আমার কোনো সিস্টেমের উপর ডাইনামিক লোড অ্যাপ্লাই হলো, সেই ডাইনামিক লোডের
হুম,
সিস্টেম কি করে ডিজাইন করতে হবে এইসব এফএম দিয়ে করা হয়।
ওকে ওকে so what I have got from three of you is that I mean uh, you have some basic idea. I mean, yeah, you might have some advanced ideas as well. What I'm saying is that some of the points that you brought out, okay, that I would also like to introduce at the very beginning of the course. So the first thing that I liked, one of you mentioned that it is number one, finite element method is a numerical method. Okay. And what is a numerical method? Numerical methods are approximate methods. And since they are approximate methods, okay, they have their own set of errors. But when do you need a numerical method or an approximate method? Okay, because they have errors, right? So you need those methods when you cannot do the exact solution. Okay, when this thing is not in the picture, when you really cannot get this. Okay, we'll talk about such situations. Okay, there are many such situations, but let's say when an exact solution cannot be obtained, then you should go for a numerical method, and which are by virtue approximate methods, and they have errors, and your job would be to minimize this error. Okay, so finite element method is a numerical method which is an approximate method, and it has errors, and there should be ways to minimize the errors. Okay, and that you should be familiar with. For example, for example, in finite element method, the errors can be improved, the errors can be reduced error can be reduced through mesh refinement. Okay, so we'll discuss about all of those, but let's just have the introductory discussion that FEM, the solution from FEM can be improved through mesh refinement. Okay, now the next point that we learned, where that actually deals with the, the title of the subject itself. Okay, we use finite elements. Okay, which means if we are given a random geometry, we need to discretize that. Okay, so we need to discretize that geometry. Okay, let's say in the forms of triangles and quadrilaterals. Okay, so each of these are elements, and as you might notice that these elements are of finite size. The size is not very small compared to the actual geometry. It is small, but it is not infinitesimally small. So they have finite size, and since they have finite size, they also would be infinite number. What can be a different situation? You take a differential element. This is a finite element and this is a differential element. And how many such elements must you take? You need to take infinite number of infinitesimal elements or differential elements. Okay. So then you need to perform the integration and so on. Okay. But this method is reserved when you are trying to get an exact solution, when you are able to get an exact solution. Okay. And many times you are not. Okay. So these are the two things you pointed out. I probably have missed if you have mentioned any more. But before going into this, I'd like to talk about something else as well. How many of you, those who opted for finite element method in your undergrads, have heard about calculus of variations? Or how many of you are familiar with the term functionals?
Sir, as far as I can recall, the calculus of variation terms was used with the Reed's method.
No, I'm just asking whether or not have if you are, I mean, whether or not you are familiar with the term. That's what I'm asking. Are you familiar with those terms?
Yes, sir. I have heard a little bit.
Okay.
Sir, I'm not sure, but are they used to find the extremities of a function? I mean, the maxima or the minima or like that? I'm not sure.
Okay. You are almost correct. It's the calculus of variation is used for finding out the maxima and minima of a functional. Okay, not a function. That's a different entity, a functional. Okay, so we'll discuss about all of these. And the calculus of variation is another, you can think of another separate field of calculus. Okay, and usually in the undergrad level, although the calculus of variation may be slightly introduced, it is not actually used in the finite element method. Okay, but what I think, at least when you are in your masters, that is a proper way to learn finite element method. Now, what is calculus of variation? Uh, mm, when, let's say, when you are trying to find out the maximum or minimum of a function, let's take the example of sine of x. Okay, so let's say when we want to get the maximum of that function, any arbitrary function, what do? We take derivative, we take differentiation. Okay, and then we set that first derivative to 0 and check the second derivative is second derivative is less than 0. So all those things we do to get, let's say, the maximum. Okay, so we use the normal calculus that we have learned so far, that we use to find out the maxima or the minima of a function. Okay, now when it comes to function null, we need to introduce something called the calculus of variations. Okay, so what is actually a function null, and what is it, how is it different from a function? We'll see that in some time. Okay, so if you have a function, you use normal calculus. You have a functional, you use the calculus of variation. Okay, as simple as that. Okay, acha. So now so far we have discussed a little bit about the subject, and some of you also introduced yourselves. I didn't introduce myself until now. So my name is Siddhartha Patro. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, Jadavpur University, since 2014, and I have been taking this course from 2014. Okay, I follow a mathematical approach to the course. Okay, and it at the very beginning of the subject, okay, that might seem difficult to a lot of you. Okay, and I'll make some claims. Okay, and I'll demand something from you to learn. Okay, that might be difficult in the beginning, but as you process the initial part of the subject, the later part becomes much smoother. Okay, finite element method is a mathematical tool or mathematical technique, just like any other numerical technique, is best suited for computer application. And you might know by this time that computers are not very smart, unless of course you program them to be. They are only good in doing repetitive work. Okay, so that means a major part of this subject is also about how you can manage data. Okay, or how you can do a certain set of calculations. Okay, it is not data science per se, but it's a subject which is best implemented through computer programming. Now now the initial part is where the mathematical formulation lies, and that is what will take more time in understanding. Okay, and once you are familiar with that, the remaining part would be, as I said, a lot simpler. Okay, so in today's class, we will actually be starting with one story. Okay, and this is a story of brachistochrone problem. Are you familiar with the term brachistochrone? Anyone? Okay. আমার গলার আওয়াজ শোনা যাচ্ছে তো সবার?
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
ওকে ওকে ওকে
Yes, sir.
ওকে ওকে
Yes, yes.
So in possibly in 17th century, okay, somebody wrote in chat, not familiar. Thank you. Okay, in 17th century, a scientist whose name was Johann Bernoulli. Now, don't ask me which Bernoulli is, if this Bernoulli is same as the one in the Bernoulli's equation. The fact is, the Bernoulli family is known for being for producing a number of scientists over the generations. Okay, there would be a lot of Bernoulli's equation and coming from different fields of physics. Okay, contributed by different Bernoullis. Okay, so I don't know exactly which Bernoulli is Johann Bernoulli, but Johann Bernoulli, so he proposed to his students one particular problem, that there would be a frictionless chute. Okay, so this surface is frictionless and it is lying on a vertical plane. Okay, so this frictional chute is there and there is one starting point. Okay, coordinates x1 y1 and the final coordinate is x2 y2. So those two are given, the initial coordinate and the final coordinate given on a vertical plane. And let's say you are dropping a ball of mass m. The mass doesn't really matter here. Okay, and you are releasing it, let's say from rest. Okay, so you're releasing it from rest. Okay, and it is supposed to slide down this frictionless chute, okay, from let's say point 1 to point 2. Okay, so the question remains that what profile between these 2 points gives you the least time? I mean, what profile must the path be or the chute have in order for the ball to take the least time from going from point 1 to point 2? Remember, only these 2 points are fixed. Okay, so hence comes the least time problem or the Brachistochrone problem. Okay, this is a difficult term. I don't know the full meaning of it, but this Crone part obviously means time. Okay, so this problem was given to his students and they couldn't solve it for 6 months. Okay, and then this problem was made public. Okay, it was, you know, like it would be, you know, delivered with the newspaper in the form of pamphlet. Okay, everywhere. Also, I do not know whether in 17th century they would deliver newspapers, but all I'm saying is the problem was distributed among the mass. Okay, and one day one particular scientist was, you know, saw that pamphlet in the morning. Okay, and in the evening when he came, okay, so he took the problem and by next morning when he went for work, so he had already solved the problem. Not only did he solve the problem, he also invented a new form of mathematics called the calculus of variations, and he posted that solution. Okay, and when Johann Bernoulli got that solution, his expression was that we can identify a lion by seeing the mark of his paw. Okay, so he could identify that scientist was none other than Sir Isaac Newton. So with that came the calculus of variation. Okay, so now first try to see how such a problem, how this problem can be represented in mathematical form. I mean, it is easy to describe the problem, but how can it be represented in the mathematics that we understand? So let's say it moves to, let's say if I treat this to be the origin, the starting point, let's consider this to be origin. Okay, which means x1 is 0 and y1 is also 0. Okay, so I'm just making an assumption. The problem could be represented even without that assumption, but let's make that assumption. And what do you do next is, let's say at certain interval of time, after certain interval of time, it descends to another point having a coordinate of y, or having coordinates x and y. Okay, so it has descended by this much amount, y. Okay, now obviously when I present to you the brachistochrone problem, okay, in your mind you can intuitively think of the solution. What solution comes to your mind? That if I give you 2 points on a vertical plane, what is the path that gives you the least time? What solution does come to your mind? Do you get any thought how the path should be?
Sir, it might be straight line.
It might be straight line. Yes, that is actually the honest, intuitive answer. Sorry?
No, sir, I haven't told you.
Okay. Yes, because that thing comes to our mind directly. But the thing is, this problem is not about the shortest distance. It is the problem about shortest time. Okay, and they may not be the same solution. The solution for both of them may not be the same. So now let's see if it falls by a height of y in whatever path. Okay, it doesn't matter. Please remember, this is frictionless. Okay, so no energy is, no mechanical energy is wasted or dissipated in the form of heat. So so whatever is the loss in potential energy is the gain in the kinetic energy. Okay, so the velocity or the speed at this instant, obviously the speed would be directed along the tangent. The velocity would be directed along the tangent to the path. Okay, if you recall the nt coordinate system of the particle dynamics, so the velocity is always directed along the tangent to a path. So the magnitude of the velocity or the speed would be square root of twice gy. Okay, which this term you should be familiar with. Why this is so? Achha. Then let's say it travels a distance. ds, differential distance ds along the path. Okay, with that velocity, then the differential time taken to travel that differential distance ds is square root of twice gy. Okay, now if you really think about it,
y is positive or negative?
okay, I have not drawn the axis, but you can take it like this, x and y. Okay, does this make sense now?
Okay.
Okay, so this differential distance ds, okay, you might notice by this time this is actually dx squared plus dy squared and the square root of that, which means it is 1 plus y prime squared dx. Familiar with the term y prime? What does that represent?
So
What
dy
is y
dx.
prime? dy dx.
Slope of curve.
Yes, correct. So and yes, it does represent the slope of the path. So in the end, we can write it to be the total time t is this quantity. Correct me if I am wrong. Okay, so this is the mathematical representation. Okay, so this quantity t is supposed to be minimized, right? This quantity t is what is to be minimized. So your optimization problem is minimize t, but with respect to what? You are actually supposed to find out that profile of y as a function of x. Okay, actually this problem can be represented minimize with respect to y and y prime this integration. You see, when we would like to minimize or maximize, let's say, a function of x, okay, with respect to x, then we are looking for some value of x, okay, and that value of x can be obtained from an algebraic equation which is f prime of x equals 0. Okay, you can obtain this from an algebraic equation. So let's say f of x is x squared, then x squared minus 5. Okay, let's say. So f prime x should be twice x. Okay, and you set that value equal to 0. So that is an algebraic equation. But remember, here you are trying to minimize a function with respect to the values of x. Okay, now compare this problem. Here you are trying to minimize. Here you are trying to minimize a definite integral. Okay, so this quantity t is not a function of x. For instance, I can write it to be, let's say y is f of x. I can also write it to be within limits x1 to x2 1 plus f prime z squared square root of twice g f of z dz. Okay, so it doesn't actually matter whether you are integrating with respect to x or z. All I'm trying to say here, this t, this quantity t over here, okay, is just a number. Okay, once you are done with this integration, this quantity t is just a number. It is not a function of x. Okay, unlike this quantity fx over here, which would be changing at different values of x. Okay, but what does t depend on? Although t is a number, that doesn't mean it's a constant number. It's not a constant. T depends on something. What does t depend on? Whether y of x is x squared or y of x is sine of x. If you take y of x as sine of x, you will get a different value of t. If you take y of x as x squared, you will get a different value of t. So it depends on the functional form of y. Okay, in a way, this quantity t is a function of the functional form of y. Okay, and t over here is called a functional of y and y prime. Okay, তাহলে কি দেখলাম আমরা যে t results from a definite integral, and if we have a fixed value, I mean fixed functional form of y, if we have determined the functional form of y, then t is just a number. But if we keep on changing the functional form of y, we will be getting different values of t, and hence therefore the values of t are functions of the functional form of y. Okay, in such a situation a quantity would be called a functional. Okay, এই পার্টটা বোঝা গেল? Is this clear to everyone, this part?
Yes, sir.
So, could you explain how did we get the expression ds equals to root of ds squared? That one?
Yeah, sure. Look at this. This much is ds, right? If you move horizontally, this part would be the differential x, and this part would be the differential y, right? And this ratio
Yeah.
of dy to dx would essentially define this slope, right? Dy to dx would define this slope. Can you see this? And actually, this differential distance is, whatever this expression is. Is it clear now?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So how many of you are attending this class with, with a pen and a paper? And how many of you are simply, holding your phone in front of you? This course will require you to do some hand calculations or steps, okay? And once you do it while attending the course, that is the best way, okay? So do take this course seriously, okay? So next class onwards, what I would try to do is take the class at the time of the class, but the problem is I do not have the setup to conduct an online class while I'm at the university. And on Monday afternoon, I'll be at the university. So probably I'll be taking the Monday's class in the evening, either Monday evening or if you have time, if all of you have free slot, then on the Saturday evening, okay? But for the time being, just think of it as Monday evening, okay? But Wednesday's class, I'll try to take it from the scheduled class time. I mean, at the scheduled class time, and I'll be doing it from home. Okay, and do consider this. Although we are having an online class here, do consider this to be a classroom lecture, and treat it like a classroom lecture. And bring your copy, pen, whatever, and do all the steps. Okay. Doing the mathematical steps is going to be the most important part of learning this course. You would not learn anything of this course if you do not do the steps on your own. Okay, if you simply look at it, you will not learn anything. Okay, Acha. So let's summarize what we have learned so far. So let's say this is any functional, a general functional, and this is how you minimize a functional with respect to. So this functional can be defined as between the limits x1 and x2 some arbitrary function of y and y prime, okay, dx. That is the functional. A functional may be, a general functional may be defined like this. In Brachistochrone problem, this function of y and y prime is essentially this. Okay, for any different function, it would be some different form. Okay, so the thing is, you need to find that particular function y which would minimize this functional. Okay, and we are given this task to minimize this functional. Okay, so this thing is called a functional. Which is a function of the functional form of y, which means this depends on what type of function y of x is. If y of x is sine of x, this would be a different value. If y of x is e to the power x, this would be a different value. As simple as that. Acha. Now let's see how we can optimize a functional. Okay, and here we are taking the example of a general functional. Okay, once we learn how to optimize a general functional, we can also use that to optimize, to minimize, let's say, the Brachistocone problem, the functional in the Brachistocone problem, or any other problem. Okay, now at this point, I'd like to mention some of the sources. Okay, some books, some notes, some lectures, etc. So first, let's talk about whatever email ID that you provided to your respective specialization, or whatever email ID I got. What I did was I collected all of them, okay, and shared a particular folder in my Google Drive with all of you. Okay, by this time that folder has 2 PDFs. One is one of them being the notes on solid mechanics. Okay, that particular notes, that particular PDF, discusses about the solid mechanics part, which is the prerequisite to a finite element course. Okay, now those of you who even had subjects such as strength of materials or solid mechanics, that means the ones from mechanical engineering department or related, production or any other department, even for them, so this is not partial to anyone. All I'm saying is, even for them, that particular discussion on solid mechanics is going to be an advanced topic. Okay, because in undergrad we hardly talk about 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional stress state. Okay, and we hardly look at strain the way it has been discussed in that particular note. Okay, but looking at stresses and strains the way they actually are, which are basically tensors, okay, that is matrices, second order tensors, okay, and deformations as vectors, that would be that I would suggest that you do as soon as possible. Okay, probably before coming for next day's class, you should have gone through that entire note. Okay, other than that, anything that I would teach in finite element method, that particular note is also given there, but that doesn't mean that that would be a substitute for the online lectures. I mean, that doesn't mean you can skip all the online lectures and only the night before the exam you can go through that note and you'll understand everything. You'll not understand a single line of that. Okay, that's why the online lectures are there. The notes are only for your reference. When you miss something, when you forget something, you can just turn the pages over and look into them. So that note is there. Apart from that, I have also given you one particular video lecture that I was conducting in the current semester, okay, in an undergrad course. So I recorded that video. That part actually discusses about solid mechanics. So you'll find one lecture related to solid mechanics as well. Okay, if you want to skip the notes on solid mechanics, or if you want to spend only an hour or 2 to learn whatever solid mechanics we require for our course in finite element method, you can go through that video lecture. Okay, that should be sufficient. And if you need any further reference, you can always go back to the note on that. I don't think any other study material I have shared in that folder. But have you looked into this PDFs and videos in that folder? Any of you have you looked? Has any one of you looked into that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Sir, I have
So,
also-
Yes, sir.
okay.
Yes, sir, I'm fine.
Okay.
স্যার ওখানে
Sorry?
আরেকটা ভিডিও ছিল স্যার
হ্যাঁ
ওখানে ভিডিও লেকচার ছিল ওখানে।
হ্যাঁ, না মুশকিল কি হয়েছে, যেদিন আমি ওই লেকচারটা দিচ্ছিলাম সলিড মেকানিক্সে, সেদিনকে somehow there was a network issue, so those are basically the two parts of a single lecture, nothing else.
ঠিক আছে স্যার, কারণ ওখানে একটাতে কন্টিনিউড লেখা ছিল।
হ্যাঁ কন্টিনিউড, কারণ মানে ওই প্রথম পার্টটা হয়ে যাওয়ার পর পরের পার্টটা আলাদা করে রেকর্ড করতে হবে সেই জন্য।
ঠিক আছে স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
Okay. Okay. So, so those are your materials, but I would also like to mention some of the books, okay, on either of the topics. Okay. So first, some of the books on solid mechanics. Or continuum mechanics. I would suggest you go through the book by L.S. Srinath. Okay, this is of course PG level book, and if you are interested, you should also go through Chandrasekhar Jog's book, okay, which might be a little complicated, because there would be a lot of notations, lot of fourth order tensors and all, okay, but that would be be giving you good understanding of the subject as well. Acha. Number 2, for finite element method, there are a lot of books, but I would suggest 2 books. One is by J.N. Reddy. Now, J.N. Reddy probably has 2 books on finite element method. One is the basic finite element method. The other one is probably nonlinear finite element method. For the timing, you can only focus on the basic finite element method. The book on basic finite element method. Number 2, or the introductory book. Number 2 is by Chandraputla. And Belegundu. Why am I suggesting the first book is, I'll probably be following more or less the approach that J.N. Reddy has followed. But why I'm also suggesting the second book is because that book is really easy to understand, and you can go through that very rapidly, and you can grasp the subject very easily in that. But formulation wise, I'd be following the more mathematically accurate approach that probably J.N. Reddy has followed. Acha. Now, in addition to all of this, I would like to mention a third source. You can visit this website, hifem.com. Okay, this is actually a website created by a group of PhD students in Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Chandrasekhar Jog, they are actually students of Professor Chandrasekhar Jog. Okay, this person, who is a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, IISc Bangalore. So in that website, we'll actually find Chandrasekhar Jog's class note on finite element method. Now, the one that I have shared, okay, that of course is made by me, that class note on finite element method in that folder. So that particular version is actually more simplified and smaller version of whatever you'll find in Chandrasekhar Jog's note. Okay, so if you want to visit the parent version of the class note, then you can look into Chandrasekhar Jog's note, and that would be available in hifem.com. Okay, so do you have any query regarding any of the sources? Okay.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. So once you look into them,
No,
you'll
sir.
probably have some. Yes. Okay. So okay, now let's see how we can, optimize a functional. Okay. So let's say in our problem, now you see if it is a general functional, we are altogether talking about a different type of optimization. Okay, different problem altogether. We are talking about optimizing a different quantity. Hence, we are, talking about a different problem. Okay. And with reference to that problem, let's say the initial and the final points are given. That means the value of y at, so let's say this is the y-axis and this is the x-axis. This time I'm drawing it in a reverse way. Okay, let's say the value of y at x1 is given and value of y at x2 is also given. So this is y2 and this is y1. Okay, so y at x1 is y1, y at x2 is y2. Okay, imagine those two are given. Okay, and whatever this functional may be, let's say this particular function y of x is the minima. You understand the term minima, right? Minima, let's say you are trying to, minimize with respect to x, f of x, okay? Then the value of x that minimizes f, okay, which comes from the solution of the algebraic equation f prime x equals 0. Okay, and if there are multiple solutions, then you'll have to see that f double prime x is actually greater than 0. Okay, so the value that gives you x double prime greater than 0 and x prime equals 0 is the one that minimizes f of x. Okay, here we are not talking about minimizing a function but a functional which we have already defined. Okay, and that can be minimized or maximized, or the value can be changed by changing the functional form. The functional form of y that minimizes that functional is this one, the one which is drawn in magenta. Now any arbitrary function y tilde, which obviously doesn't okay, minimize the functional I, can be represented like this. Why am I bound to show the two ends at the same points? It's because the boundary conditions are given. Okay, so the boundary conditions on y at both ends have been given. That's why I'm bound to show y at x1 and y at x1 as y1 and y at x2 as y2. Okay, but everywhere else, okay, it can be a different function than the optima or the minima. Okay, now you see my goal in this problem is to find out y of x, but the approach that I'm following is where I'm mentally assuming, let's say if I knew what was the optimum solution, okay, then what would be the case? That is how I'm thinking here. Okay, and then any arbitrary function, arbitrary admissible function, in order to be admissible, it has to have the same value of y at the boundaries as prescribed by the boundary conditions. Okay, so any arbitrary function can be thought of the minima function plus some variation. This variation, let's say we would call it delta of y. Okay, now this delta of y is arbitrary. Okay, just because I'm writing delta, that doesn't mean it is a very tiny quantity. It is not a differential quantity. It doesn't mean it's a small difference. It is a finite quantity. Okay, the value of this function, this delta y, is also a function of x. Okay, and the value of delta y is also finite. Okay, it is actually arbitrary. Okay, because it represents a difference between y tilde and y. That's why I am writing is a delta y. What I can additionally do is I can use a scaling parameter epsilon. Okay, which means if I increase delta, increase epsilon, this would be the value of y tilde. Okay, if I decrease the epsilon, the y tilde would be different. Okay, now first of all, delta y is arbitrary. Okay, let's say delta y can be sine of x, cos of x, anything. And then again, what I'm doing is I'm adding more arbitrariness by multiplying with a scaling factor epsilon. Okay.
So what does scaling factor mean?
Scaling factor, scaling factor means that, let's say, if I take any arbitrary function, okay, look at this function. There are some constraint on delta y. Delta y is 0 at x1, delta y is 0 at x2. Okay, this delta y is called the variation of y. Okay, more about variation will come later, but for the timing, just know that this is called the variation of y, and the variation should be 0 wherever the value of y is given, because at the beginning of the problem the values of y were given at x1 and x2. The variation must be 0 because any arbitrary admissible function must also have the same values at x1 and y1, x1 and x2. Okay, like the actual solution.
Okay.
Okay, so the variation must be 0 at the two points. But if you also think about it, this particular quantity, the arbitrary admissible function, admissible money, which can be thought of that it could be a potential solution. Okay, so in order to be considered to be a potential solution, it would be the actual solution plus this delta y. This delta y satisfying these boundary conditions. Okay, you see here the approach is from the behind. Okay, actually you are supposed to arrive at this solution. What instead we are doing is we are assuming that, let's say if I have a solution, then what would be an arbitrarily admissible function? It would be simply the actual solution plus some variation. Okay, now this variation is arbitrary. Now what does a scaling function factor do is, let's say if I add another just number where epsilon can, let's say, change between -infinity to infinity. Okay, so then by changing the value of epsilon, okay, I can think of, okay, a set of functions. By changing the value of epsilon, I can think of a set of functions, okay, which kind of look like this. Okay, now by changing delta y, I can have all possible functions. Okay, all possible functions which have the values y at x1 as y1 and y at x2 as y2. Okay, so by changing two arbitrary quantities, one is simply a number which is independent of x, and the other one is dependent on x. Okay, by changing this function and this scaling factor, okay, I can take any possible function that goes past these 2 points. Okay, so the scaling factor is introduced to have something in my formulation which is not a function of x. Okay, so for example, delta y can, the actual solution can be some function, but delta y, let's say, can be sine of x. Okay, then I can take the value of epsilon to be 0.5. Then the variation is, then the the deviation from the optimum solution is 0.5 sine of x. Okay, so I can take delta y to be, let's say, sine of x, which should be a function of x, but then epsilon, let's say, I can take it to be 0.5. So the arbitrary function would be the optimum solution plus 0.5 sine of x. Okay.
Okay.
Now, okay, now
Okay.
what we will do is we'll write I tilde. Okay, this sign is called tilde. Okay, tilde. So I tilde, now this is not the optimum solution. I tilde is when you substitute y tilde for y. You see, derivation and integration are scalar operations. So this quantity is going to be, and because epsilon is not a function of x, so you only need to take the derivative of the variation of y. You see, this delta y is just as much a finite function as y. Okay. Later we would argue that delta y must belong to the same function space as y. Now, what is a function space? We'll talk about that later. Okay, but delta y is just as much a function as y, and it is not a small value. It is not a small perturbation. It is nothing like that. Okay, it is a finite, finite quantity, and it's a function of x. So now you see, f of y tilde and y tilde prime can be written as f of y comma y prime plus epsilon times del f del y delta y plus del f del y prime delta y prime. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm expanding this quantity in Taylor series. Do you follow Taylor series? ওকে, যাদের যাদের খেয়াল নেই টেলর সিরিজ, আমি যখন এই ভিডিওটা শেয়ার করে দেবো, আবার যখন এই জায়গাটা দেখবে, তখন টেলর সিরিজ ইন্টারনেটে কি বলে সেটা আরেকবার দেখে নেবে। নেক্সট টার্ম যেটা হবে, দেখো প্রথম টার্মটা এরকম দেখতে হবে, পরের টার্মটা কি রকম হবে, তাতে সেকেন্ড ডেরিভেটিভ থাকবে, ঠিক আছে, সেগুলোতে আমি যাচ্ছি না। So I'm not going for the next term, but all I can say that the next term and the terms onwards would be of the order epsilon squared. I'll be correct in saying that, right? Those would be epsilon squared. Now, epsilon is also a finite quantity. It is not epsilon tends to 0. It's not. Okay. I'm just, saying that the next term and onwards would be of the order epsilon squared. Okay. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, sir. So it is like saying f of x plus c or x plus h is f of x plus h times df dx. Now, since there are more than one quantities here, hence the partial derivative. plus h squared by 2 factorial d2f dx2 and so on up to infinity. That's what is Taylor series. Now this term onwards, you can say they are h squared and higher order terms. They involve h squared and higher order terms. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, epsilon squared and higher order terms. Which means, acha, now I don't need this figure anymore. Which means I can write it to be integration x1 to x2 f of y prime dx, number 1, plus, you see epsilon is not a function of x and hence comes out of the integration, plus terms of the order of epsilon squared. So the next terms would be having terms epsilon squared. Okay, so the first term independent of epsilon, the next term linear in epsilon, the other terms, okay, would be involving epsilon squared, epsilon cube, and so on, hence order epsilon squared. Now what about this quantity? This quantity is essentially I. Okay, remember y minimizes I, where I is f of y and y prime dx, integration f of y prime dx. Okay, so this is the minimum value of I tilde. I is the minimum value of I tilde. Okay, so I tilde is I plus epsilon times this quantity. Okay, what quantity? This quantity, integration x1 to x2 del f del y delta y del f del y prime delta y prime dx. So this we would call as the first variation, of the functional I. So this symbol delta I with superscript 1. So over here it becomes epsilon times the first variation of I plus order epsilon squared. Now একটা জিনিস দেখো, first of all I tilde at epsilon equals 0 is I, because y tilde at epsilon equals 0 is y. Okay, the function that minimizes the functional. Okay, therefore I tilde at epsilon equals 0 is I. So now you can think of I tilde being a function of epsilon. Okay, and therefore the partial derivative of I tilde with respect to epsilon at epsilon equals 0 should be 0, because at epsilon equals 0 I tilde is the minimum value I, therefore its derivative with respect to epsilon should be 0, which means the first variation of I should be 0. Is this part clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
So can you please repeat this part again?
Yes. There are two ways to understand about this. Okay. I'll give you the more, elaborate way. Imagine this time. Now, so far, epsilon was finite quantity. Now we are considering when epsilon tends to 0. If epsilon tends to 0, the higher order terms, okay, very rapidly, see if epsilon is 0.001, epsilon squared would be 10 to the power minus 6. If it is 10 to the power minus 4, it would be 10 to the power minus 8, and so on. Epsilon q would be even smaller. Okay, so when epsilon tends to 0, the most significant term after I would be the linear term in epsilon. Is that part clear? If epsilon is really, really small, the most significant term, the quantity with the highest absolute value, okay, would be the linear term, okay, highest absolute value after this quantity I over here would be the linear term. Is that part clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now our argument was, why was that function which would minimize this functional? That means the minimum value of I tilde is I. That means instead of taking y, that means instead of taking epsilon equals 0, any other value, instead of taking, so when you take epsilon equals 0, y tilde is y and I tilde is I, and that is the minimum value. You take any other value of epsilon, that value must be higher than I. For any non-zero value of epsilon, maybe limit epsilon tends to 0, but still non-zero, okay, then I tilde should be higher than I.
Yeah.
Okay, which means that that this quantity should always be positive. The most significant term, it should be always positive.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now the problem is epsilon can go from minus infinity to plus infinity. Okay, whatever epsilon you had in your mind, let's say 10 to the power minus 4, now make it minus 10 to the power minus 4. The only way, either situation I tilde is higher than I, is when the linear term actually doesn't matter, because the coefficient of the linear term is 0, and only the second order term and higher order terms matter. Is this part clear? You see, the first term being a linear term is a signed quantity. So when epsilon is negative, that quantity is negative. When epsilon is positive, that quantity is positive, or vice versa. So when epsilon is positive, this quantity being negative, this is positive. But when epsilon is positive, then this is negative. Okay, so this entire term is a signed quantity, but the next term, probably with epsilon squared, can be a sign independent term. Okay. So the thing is, the sign term must have a 0 coefficient. Otherwise, it doesn't satisfy that whether you take positive epsilon and negative epsilon, you get this quantity higher than I. Okay, there should be no effect of this term. When there is no effect of this term, that means this the coefficient of epsilon, the linear term of epsilon is 0. Then you start taking the coefficient of the epsilon squared term, and then the epsilon squared term becomes the most significant term. And when the epsilon squared term is the most significant term, then the sign of epsilon doesn't matter. In either case, it would be greater than 0. I mean, greater than I. I tilde would be greater than I. Is that part clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's why the only way I is the minimum of I tilde, or y is the minima, I is the minimum value of I tilde, or y is the minima, is that the first variation should be 0. That means this integration must be 0. Okay, this part is the I mean, for today's class, this is the most crucial part. If anyone who has not understood this. If there is anyone who has not understood this, please let me know. সবাই বুঝেছে এই পার্টটা? Okay, good. Okay, so the point is the first variation needs to be 0, and that needs to be true for any arbitrary any arbitrary variation. Okay, you see, I never made any assumption about the functional form that I'm taking for the variation. Okay, this symbol means for all. This literally means for all. Okay, for all delta y in and this symbol means in the function space containing Vy. Okay, the only two conditions, or the only condition on delta y is wherever the value of y is given, in this case at both the boundaries x1 and x2, delta y must be 0 wherever the value of y is given. That's how a variation is defined. Okay. Okay, so this quantity is 0. So if you want to relate this to anything, let's say when you take the gradient of a scalar with respect to a vector. Okay, when you take a gradient of a scalar with respect to a vector. Okay, let's say I'm just trying to give you an analogy that you want to, this phi is a function of xyz. Okay, and it basically is a 3-dimensional surface in a 4-dimensional space. Okay, so don't try to visualize that, but when you are trying to minimize this, then you must satisfy del phi del x, del phi del y, del phi del z equals 0. Okay, or you can, what you can do is, instead of taking derivative with respect to individual coordinates, what you can do is you can choose a given direction, let's say 1 0 0. Actually that's what is being done here. Okay, and then you perturb the value of the coordinates in that given direction. Okay, so what you do is phi x plus dx y z subtract phi x y z, and then delta x, or I should choose a different notation. Okay, let's say dx, and divided with dx. Okay, so this quantity should be 0. Then with respect to y you do the same thing and set it to 0, and with respect to z you do the same thing and do this and get and equate that to 0. Okay, now now when we use the variation, okay, and when you use the arbitrariness of the variation, what we are essentially doing is that whether you take the variation of one type of function, you see the variation could have been any function. Delta y could have been sine of x, or 1 minus cos of x, or anything. Okay, whatever satisfies the boundary condition. Okay, it can be different set of functions, or for example x squared, it could have been x squared. So as long as it satisfies the boundary condition, it is an admissible variation. And for each type of variation, whatever so this should be equal to 0. So for a function to be minimized, for a scalar function to be minimized, you take the derivative in each direction, and for a function null you show that independent of the type of variation you take, you can think of a type of variation as a direction, and the scalar epsilon that you are multiplying, that is simply a value attached to that direction. You can think of a given variation as a direction. So you are perturbing in different direction and setting the resulting gradient equal to 0. Okay, so just like the scalar function of a vector coordinate. So we'll come to this later. Okay, but now let's see what we have. The first variation of I, which is this quantity, del f del y delta y plus del f del y prime delta y prime dx equals 0. So the next line we could write is x1 x2 del f del y delta y dx plus, for the second term we would do integration by parts, and the purpose of doing so is we want to remove the derivative from the variation. We want to remove x derivative from the variation. So what you do is, the first term should be del f del y prime delta y at x1 and x2 minus x1 to x2 del f del y prime, rather ddx of del f del y prime times delta y dx, and that whole thing equals to 0. এই স্টেপটা বোঝা যাচ্ছে? So do all of you follow this next step?
Sir, আরেকবার বলবেন প্লিজ এই স্টেপটা।
So what I did was,
explain করুন না।
So the second term, what we did was we simply integrated by parts. Okay. Integration by parts কি হয়? So what I actually wrote over here was, so ধরো আমার যদি এরকম দুটো টার্ম থাকে, ধরা যাক u prime v prime dx or u v prime dx, say let's say u and v are functions of x, and if I were to integrate u prime v prime dx, u v prime dx, so what I can do is I can write it to be u v minus integration u prime v dx, right? That's what is integration by parts.
Yes, sir.
Do you recall integration by parts?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So are you can you relate to this term, this second expression?
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
Now, yep.
Okay, so that's what I'm doing here. It's just that here it is an indefinite integral and I'm doing a definite integral. Okay, I'm removing derivative from this one and introducing more derivative on the first term, right? Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now look at the middle term. The middle term essentially means del f del y prime delta y evaluated at x2 minus del f del y prime evaluated at times delta y evaluated at x1. Okay, so we have two boundary terms. Whatever is not a part of the integration are boundary terms, because you see they are being evaluated at two boundaries, x1 and x2, right? বুঝা যাচ্ছে?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now can you tell me what is the value of this quantity del f del y prime delta y evaluated at x2? What is the value of this quantity at x2, this product?
X2.
Don't bother about this term actually.
I
Sorry?
think 0. Sir, 0, I think
Yes,
so.
0, because as I have been repeatedly mentioning that delta y at x2 is 0 and delta y at x1 is 0. For a problem where the value of y at x1 is given, since the value of y is given at x1 and x2, we have shown in that diagram why the variation should be 0 at those two values. Okay, so that means at later you encounter problems where this is not true, this is not universally true, and wherever this is not true, this is also not be true. But at least in this problem, at least in context with brachistochrone problem, we can agree that because y value is given at x1 and x2, the variation should be 0 at x1 and x2. That means delta y at x2 is 0 and delta y at x1 is 0. Can we agree on that?
Yes, sir.
Which
Yes,
means
sir.
both the terms are zeros. Which means this entire term is 0. So the boundary term doesn't survive at all. All that survives is those integrations. Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Achha. Now let's see what term did we get. So eventually what we get here is this quantity, integration x1 to x2. See, and this should be true for all delta y, any arbitrary delta y. Again, the delta y could have been anything. It could have been sine of x, cos of x, 1 minus cos of x, whatever. Okay, only satisfying the boundary condition. Okay, it could be anything. For each and every such variation, this relation should be true. You see, this is a statement about not the actual function that we are looking into. We are actually looking into the function y. Okay, but delta y, which is a different function, it is a statement about that function, that whatever that function may be, this relation is going to be true. Okay, please keep that in mind. Then del f del y plus ddx of del f del y prime, this whole thing times delta y. This is why we did the integration by parts, because we wanted delta y on either of the integrations. Dx is 0 for all arbitrary delta y. Okay. মানে আমার delta y যাই হোক না কেন, this integration, this definite integral would be 0. And how, what does that mean? If this relation is true for any arbitrary delta y, what is that supposed to mean? Can anybody tell me what is the meaning of that? This means this quantity within bracket is itself 0. And this quantity within brackets is actually a function of x. And that function of x is 0 anywhere between x1 to x2. Okay. And this actually gives you a differential equation. Okay. And this general form has a name. It is called Euler-Lagrange equation. Okay. And one more thing to notice, when I wanted to minimize a function, I got an algebraic equation that f prime of x is 0 at that value of x, whatever minimizes f. When I try to minimize a functional with respect to some function, okay, whatever function minimizes I, the differential equation for that function, you see, we can only find out a function from a differential equation. From an algebraic equation, we can only find out a certain value, but a function can be only obtained from a differential equation. So when we try to minimize a functional, we get a differential equation. Okay, so that sort of comparison you can do between a function and a functional. The function depends on the values of x. The functional is a definite integral which depends on the functional form of y. So when we try to minimize the function, we are trying to get the value of x which minimizes the value of which minimizes f. Here we are trying to find out a function that minimizes that functional. And how to obtain that value of x? At that value of x, the first derivative of f is 0. How do I get the function y? We get the differential equation through Euler-Lagrange equation. Okay. Now, if it is still confusing for some of you that why, if this is true for all arbitrary variation, why this quantity itself should be 0? I'll tell you, consider this variation of y as the delta function. Are you familiar with delta function? Is there any one of you who is familiar with delta function?
Sir, don't know, sir. What? I don't know.
Oh, okay. A delta function is something you can go look in the internet. If you multiply, if you do a definite integral, let's say x1 to x2 dx, if you take delta function x minus x star, okay, and multiply with f of x, that will give you f of x star, provided x star is between x1 to x2. Okay, so
this is the direct delta function?
Huh? Yeah, direct delta function.
Okay.
So delta function is essentially a Gaussian distribution, the type of distribution you see in normal curves. Okay, but I forgot the the expression for Gaussian distribution, so I'm not writing it. But delta function is a special case of Gaussian function. You see, the majority of the distribution in a normal distribution, the majority of the area lies between plus minus 3 sigma, but that sigma in delta function is actually tends to 0. So basically the delta function looks like this, something with infinite height. You see the total area is always 1. Okay, so the something with infinite height but 0 span, so it looks something like this. That's what is a delta function, where this value is x star. Okay, so when you multiply delta function with any arbitrary function and then you integrate, basically it fetches, it just pulls out from this integration, it just pulls out the value of fx at x star. Okay, and that becomes the output of the integration. Okay, and if you look at delta function, okay, delta function is 0 everywhere and has a very infinite value at certain value x star. Okay, which means it qualifies as a potential variation because it is 0 at x1 and x2. Therefore, since I can take any arbitrary function, I might also take a delta function. But if I do take delta function, it would mean if I take a delta function and perform the integration, okay, whatever this quantity is, okay, integration dx, it would mean this whole quantity evaluated at x star equals 0. Now I can do that for any arbitrary x star between x1 and x2, except for x1 and x2. Why I cannot do that? Because at x1 and x2, delta y must be 0. Okay, so except for x1 and x2, anywhere between x1 and x2, I can take x star, and there this quantity within square bracket can be shown to be 0. Okay, because this is true for all functions, so it is also true for delta function. Okay, that way I can claim that this is true, this equals 0 anywhere between x1 and x2. Okay, so now is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'll stop here today. Euler-Lagrange equation, and that is your assignment. Go through the notes, okay, and do the entire derivation on your own. Okay, and actually it is given in the notes probably how to do the solution of Brachistochrone problem using Euler-Lagrange equation. Although it might be given in the notes, for you the assignment is to try on your own, and you can make a fair copy of assignments. Okay, and if no other instructions are given, you can think of that is the only way I'll be grading you. I'll be evaluating your papers. Okay, so through your assignments. So today I'm giving you your first assignment is to solve the Brachistochrone problem using Euler-Lagrange equation, or find out the Euler-Lagrange equation of Brachistochrone problem and find out the solution. The solution is actually done in the notes. You might as well look into it, but I would suggest you do whatever derivation today we have done in the class, do it on your own, okay, and then try to solve the Brachistochrone problem on your own. Okay, but make the way you should be preparing a lab report, or the way you should be answering in an answer script, like in a very neat and clean way. Okay, so that way you should be preparing your assignment copy. At the end of the semester, you are supposed to submit that to me, or you can submit the assignments every week. Okay, so if you submit every week, it is even better. So what you need to do is you make a separate copy for assignments, and there in a very neat and clean way do whatever assignment is given to you. Okay, so your first assignment is to solve Brachistochrone problem using Euler-Lagrange equation. Okay, so if you have no further queries, we would stop here, and I would strongly suggest you go through other materials as well, whatever notes have been given to you, and the books as well. And if you still have doubt, we can discuss in the next class. And unless if you have any other queries, we can stop now.
Sir, when will be the next class?
Monday evening at 7.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you can use the same link. I'll not be sending a separate link anymore. You can use the same link.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So try to learn this much part on your own, and if you have any question, any doubt, or any feedback regarding the course, you can convey that to me on Monday. Okay, so I'm just closing the recording session as well, the presentation.